Welcome to Adventure Unfiltered with your host, Lorna. So this episode feels a little different. Instead of sitting down with one guest, I'm taking some time to step back, to revisit the conversations of season 1 and share a few personal reflections on what they've left with me. So when I first started this podcast, I didn't want it to be about chasing extremes or collecting achievements. I wanted it to be about the human side of adventure, the bits we don't always hear about and the parts that sit beneath the headlines and the highlight reels. And looking back now, I feel incredibly grateful for how these conversations have unfolded. So for my very first episode with Iona Andean, adventure was gently reimagined as something everyday, inclusive and rooted in community. A reminder that adventure doesn't have to be loud or far away to be meaningful. Next, it was Sean Green, whose journey riding the ridgelines of all 282 Munros by mountain bike became a story not just of endurance, but of grief, resilience, and what it means to keep showing up, even when life throws you completely off course. Next, we had Alice Goodridge. We slowed everything right down with that one. We talked about cold water, self-trust, and why, even after swimming the English Channel and 41 kilometres of Loch Awe, adventure for Alice has never been about titles. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe to begin. And then there was Molly Hughes, 2 conversations that took us from the noise and pressure of Everest to the deafening silence of Antarctica, from preparation, fear and exposure to solitude, stillness and one step in front of the other. What stayed with me across all of these interviews is how personal adventure really is. It's shaped by grief, by curiosity, by community, by fear and by silence. And it looks different for every single person. So in this episode, I'm going to dip back into each of those conversations, sharing the moments that stayed with me, the things that made me pause, and for a few of my favourite clips from season 1. This feels like a moment to breathe, to reflect, and to say thank you. So let's go, the final episode of Adventure Unfiltered season 1. First up, I want to take a moment to reflect on the very first episode of Adventure Unfiltered, an episode that feels like it set the tone not only for the series but for everything this podcast is about. It was with my first guest and very good friend Iona Andean, and the episode was called Adventure Reimagined. And honestly, that title couldn't have been more perfect, because what Iona brought into that conversation was a complete reframing of what adventure actually means, especially in the context of real life, everyday life, responsibilities and the quiet transitions so many of us find ourselves in. So one of the things that really stood out with me was how grounded Iona is in her approach to adventure. There was no ego, no bravado, no need to prove anything. Instead, she spoke about adventure as something deeply human, something woven into everyday life, rather than something that sits on a pedestal waiting for the perfect moment. She talked about how adventure doesn't have to be extreme to be meaningful. It doesn't have to involve summits or finish lines or epic distances. Sometimes adventure is simply saying yes. Sometimes it's stepping outside when it would be easier to stay in. And sometimes it's choosing to move your body or quiet your mind or reconnect with yourself, even when life feels busy, noisy or overwhelming. And that really resonated with me, because so often we can feel like adventure is something we've missed the boat on, especially as we get older, and especially when we're juggling work, family and all the invisible mental load that comes with that. Iona gently dismantled that idea. She reminded us that adventure isn't age dependent, it isn't about comparison, and it definitely isn't about doing more than anyone else. It's about doing what feels right and feels true for you. Another powerful theme in this episode was community. Iona spoke so openly about how adventure doesn't have to be a solo pursuit and how much richer it becomes when it's shared. She talks about the value of showing up as you are rather than who you think you should be, about creating spaces where people feel welcome, supported and seen, not for their achievements but just for their presence. And that felt especially important, because so many of us carry this quiet belief that we're not adventurous enough, we're not fit enough, we're not brave enough, and we're not experienced enough. And Iona challenged that narrative beautifully in this episode simply by being herself. There was also a real honest thread running through this conversation about change, about those moments in life where something shifts, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, and you realise that the way that you've been living no longer quite fits. Iona spoke about listening to those nudges and about trusting that curiosity, about allowing adventure to evolve alongside you rather than forcing yourself into a version of it that no longer feels right for you. And that, for me, is where the heart of Adventure Reimagined really lies. It's about permission to redefine adventure on your own terms, to start small, to begin again, to let adventure be something that supports your life, not something that competes with it. So by the end of the episode, what stayed with me the most was Iona's quiet confidence, not the loud performative type, but the kind that comes from knowing yourself and trusting your own path. And if this podcast exists for any reason at all, it's for moments like that, for conversations that remind us that adventure is deeply personal and that there's no single way to live it. So if you haven't listened to episode 1 yet, I'd really encourage you to go back and spend some time with it, especially if you've ever felt like adventure wasn't for you anymore, or maybe never was, because I think you might find, like I did, that adventure hasn't disappeared at all, it's just waiting to be reimagined. So here's my favourite clips from my conversation with Iona Andean on Adventure Reimagined. If you could choose between swimming in the ocean or swimming in a loch, which would you choose?
Okay, I'm going to say swimming in the sea because it's always guaranteed. Swimming in a loch, sometimes sludgy, muddy, blue-green algae. Yeah, I'm going to go with the sea.
If you could choose between the sea or a loch swim with a sauna, which would you choose?
I'm going to go with the sauna because you've got that extra element, so an extra sense of adventure because you've got the sauna and the loch. So
yes.
You're getting your swim, but you're getting a heat up, you can go back and forth. Yeah.
I do feel like we've levelled up when it comes to swimming as well, because whenever we get together we're like, oh, there's a sauna popped up there, let's go and try.
Do you not think that's a bit bougie? We're like, we'll go for a swim, but we'll also heat up as well.
I mean, yeah, yeah.
I'm here for it.
Okay, good, because we are right now in Cullen, in the Murray Coast, and we have just been for a sea swim and a sauna.
We have, and it was amazing. And this is our halfway point between me in Aberdeenshire and you in the Highlands. Yeah. So this is perfect. This sauna just appeared last year and it's great. It's the perfect place for us to meet up.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And I just learned last month that this is in fact the East Coast, not the north of Scotland.
Yeah.
Because
talk me through this.
Well, I always thought, like Inverness and like the Murray Coast is the north of Scotland. But actually, if you look at the map of Scotland, it's on the east coast.
I mean, I would say the Murray Coast is well and truly on the east coast of Scotland, but you've got me there with Inverness because I would say Inverness is in the north, but I guess, yeah,
look at the map.
It's on the coast, isn't it?
Because it's the Murray Firth, isn't it? So, like the north, so never eat shredded wheat. It's just...
Do you know what? This podcast, if nothing else, is going to be very informative from a geographical perspective. On a soundbite.
This is how the podcast is going to go.
I was just going to say, this is setting the tone for how this is going to go. I felt like every spare moment I was striving for another mountain, another summit, another sunset. I was just obsessed. And I actually remember at one point, it really hit me how much time I wasn't spending at home with my partner. And we both worked shifts, so sometimes we'd be like ships passing in the night anyway. And sometimes that was good, because if he was working and I was off, I could go off and do an adventure knowing that it didn't impact the time that I should have been spending with him. But I remember spending all my spare time doing that, and it wasn't with him. And then lockdown obviously turned that all on its head. So that was obviously 2020. My first baby was born in 2022. So things had changed before I had him. But now that I've got the two kids especially, you know, it's even more logistics and planning and being organised. And I just really, really like going at their pace. I just love the slow days and the not having the pressure to get out the door. Yeah, I just don't want that added pressure. I don't want that added stress. And if I can just go at their pace and everybody feels content and happy, and we've all just had a nice time and discovered something new on our doorstep, I really, really, really love that.
Yeah,
I do.
I love that. Yeah.
I just think when I'm outdoors, I just feel content and I feel confident as well. Yeah, that's one of the places I feel the most confident. And it's not necessarily scaling a mountain and standing at the summit. It's just, I feel like myself, and I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to be anybody else. I just feel happy. And I think that is something that everybody deserves and everybody should experience. And that's where I feel my happiest, is when I'm outside, especially if I'm with my kids. That's just seeing the world through their eyes, seeing the natural world through their eyes is so, so special and so amazing. And yeah, I just feel happy when I'm outside.
Oh, I love that. I think that's wonderful. I love that conversation with Iona. She's one of my very best friends and I've known her for a long time. So it made it quite easy almost. But my second guest, Sean Green, was completely different. I had never met Sean before speaking with him, and there's a real vulnerability in sitting down with a complete stranger and asking them to share their story. So the second episode of Adventure Unfiltered is with Sean Green riding the Ridgeline's 282 Munros by mountain bike. Absolutely wild. And this episode is one that stayed with me, not just because of the scale of what Sean achieved, but because of the honesty with which he spoke about why it mattered to him. On the surface, riding all 282 Munros by mountain bike sounds like a story of endurance and logistics, but very quickly it became clear that this journey ran far deeper than distance, elevation or numbers. For Sean, the mountains weren't just a backdrop, they were a place of processing, of remembering and of grief. One of the most moving moments in our conversation was when Sean spoke about the inaccessible pinnacle on Skye, a place that already demands total presence, balance, focus, commitment, but for Sean it carried something heavier. His journey there was shaped by the loss of his dad. Grief threaded its way into the climb, not as something to be pushed away, but something that simply was. Sean spoke with such quiet clarity about how the mountains held that grief, how movement, exposure and effort created space for emotions that don't always fit neatly into everyday life. There was no attempt to dramatise it, just an acceptance that adventure and loss can coexist. That sometimes the wild is where we go to feel things fully. Throughout the episode, Sean returned again and again to the idea of connection, not just between Munros, but between moments in life. Riding the ridgelines wasn't about ticking off summits. It was about travelling through the landscape, letting one mountain lead naturally to the next. Sean spoke honestly about the physical and mental fatigue, the long days where progress was slow and the patience required to keep going, not with bravado but with humility, a willingness to let the journey unfold on its own terms. And then after completing the Munro round, after all that effort, intention and movement, life shifted again. Sean broke his neck in a biking accident. That moment could have easily closed a chapter for Sean, a moment that forced stillness after so much motion. And yet, even here, Sean spoke with the same grounded perspective, acknowledging how quickly things can change and how none of this is guaranteed, which is what made the ending of our conversation so powerful. When I asked Sean about his Christmas wish, his answer wasn't about future projects or unfinished lists, it was simple. He said he wished to ride on his bike with his son again, not for achievement, not for distance, just to be together, side by side. And the most beautiful part, that Christmas wish came true. For me, that's the heart of the episode. Not the 282 Munros or the bike or the ridge lines, but the reminder that adventure is deeply human, woven through love, loss, recovery, and connection. That sometimes the greatest journeys aren't about how far we go, but who we get to share them with. So, this conversation is a quiet, powerful reminder that adventure doesn't end when things break bodies, plans, or expectations. Sometimes it simply changes shape, and sometimes, if we're lucky, it brings us back to the moments that matter the most. So here are my favourite clips from episode 2 of Adventure Unfiltered, Riding the Ridgelines with Sean Green.
And at the beginning, everybody would always say to me, "Oh, what are you going to do about this one? And what are you going to do about that one?" I was like, "There's 282 of these mountains, and you're asking me about a single one, as if that one is going to put me off the idea of what could potentially be out there."
Yeah, and I take it the two that you mentioned there are the Anarchy Gift Ridge and the Inpin.
Well, much more than that. Obviously, there's Leotach and Chelach, all the whole of the Coolin. It wasn't, enough of an emergency for an ambulance or a chopper. So again, it was just kind of all downplayed in my head. So I went about my day, got some help to put away the tent and put away the bike, and decided that, well, if I need to go to hospital, I want to do it nearer to home. So I drove 160 miles up the road, just thinking I'd damaged my shoulder, to be honest. I just felt a bit stiff. Got straight up to 9 Miles Hospital, walked in, triage nurse knew something was up pretty much straight away. And, within sort of half an hour of walking at A&E, I was told, do not move. We think you've broken your neck.
When the thing that you love injures you, how do you rebuild that relationship?
I don't know, like, I think it must be something about mountain biking, because obviously you see people who have these horrible accidents, like doing the thing they love, and a lot they can't bear to look at it again, because, it brings all this sort of negative energy about it. But I went totally the opposite way. It felt like as soon as sort of the ability to go out on my bike or even just be outside or in the hills or go away camping with the kids, or like as soon as all that was taken away, like I just wanted it more. I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to regarding this neck brace is just going riding with my son again. Like, he's my number one fan. He's my best mate. Like, he's the person that I go riding with the most. And, 2 weeks before I done this, he just got a new bike. And then obviously all of a sudden we couldn't go anywhere. Dad can't ride. Dad can't even drive. And it's eaten me alive that not only have I taken this away from me, I've taken my son's favourite pastime away from him as well. I would like to get a ride with my son before Christmas.
Well, Sean, if you are listening to this episode, I think I can speak on behalf of everybody that caught up with that episode, how delighted we are that you managed to get out for a ride with your son. And if you haven't caught this episode yet, I would seriously recommend that you go and have a listen. So my third guest on Adventure Unfiltered was Alice Goodridge of Swim Wild. Now, this episode felt like an exhale, a slowing down and a softening, which was really, really not what I expected when I had this conversation. Because Alice Goodridge has swum the English Channel solo, she's swum the 41 kilometres of Loch Awe, amongst many other extraordinary open water achievements, and yet, From the beginning of our conversation, it was clear that this episode wasn't going to be about titles, records, or proving anything, because for Alice, adventure isn't about what you can list next to your name, it's about community. Alice spoke with such clarity about her relationship with swimming and with the outdoors has always been rooted in connection rather than competition. The swims themselves were undeniably huge, but they weren't what define her. What defines her is the space she creates for others. And one of the things that really stayed with me from this conversation with Alice was how she described the honesty of cold water, how it demands your attention, and how it strips everything back. When you're in cold water, you can't multitask, you can't perform, and you can't pretend. You have to meet yourself exactly as you are. In a world that rewards constant movement and productivity, that kind of presence feels quietly radical. Alice spoke openly about how swimming became a way of finding steadiness, of regulating herself through uncertainty and reconnecting with her body during times of change. There was no language of fixing or forcing, just listening, responding and trusting. Another powerful thread running through this episode was inclusivity. Alice talked about building communities where people feel welcome to begin without labels, expectations or pressure. Spaces where adventure isn't reserved for the confident or the experienced, where you don't need to earn your place, where showing up is simply enough, and that matters so much. Because so many people quietly believe that adventure belongs to someone else, someone braver, someone fitter, and someone more capable. And Alice's work gently dismantles that idea. There was also a beautiful conversation about self-trust, learning to read the water, the weather, and your own limits, knowing when to step in and when to step back. That kind of wisdom doesn't come from chasing achievements. It comes from respect for the environment and for yourself. So by the end of our conversation, what stayed with me most about the enormity of Alice's swims was her calm certainty, a deep embodied knowing that this way of living, swimming and building community is exactly where she's meant to be. This episode is a reminder that adventure doesn't always need to push us further. Sometimes it asks us to slow down, to feel more, to connect with nature, with others, and with ourselves. And maybe, like me, you'll finish listening and feel the urge not to chase the next big thing, but to step outside, find some water, and remember that adventure can be gentle, shared, and deeply human. So here are my favourite moments from breaking waves, wild swimming and cold water connection with Alice Goodridge.
Every single swim helps you connect with the wild. Every single swim in cold water, in the lochs, in the rivers, is a moment of something beautiful, something wild. I think getting into cold water is a very mindful activity. And whatever else is going on in the world, or in your head, or whatever it is, you are almost forced into this state of focus. Focus on the cold, focus on where you are, focus on your breathing, focus on yourself, on your body. But also, you have that connection with the place that you are, the wildlife, the scenery, the other people that you're with. And I think that wild swimming encompasses so many. So we swam through into the cave, and as we were swimming towards the waterfall, the sun, the angle of the sun just suddenly started shining through the waterfall. It was like a rainbow. And when you got into the cave, it was really lit up. It wasn't like a dark, dingy cave. It was really bright in there because the sun was shining through. I remember being in there and just thinking, I can't believe it. This is just an amazing experience. And that wasn't the end of it, because when we swam back through, there were puffins everywhere. We kind of had tried to swim around and not disturb the puffins, but puffins were not bothered. So we just swam. We just swam through, and there were puffins literally diving down in the water. The first tip is trying to find people to swim with. That's really important for safety, for motivation, to have that person to have a silly but amazingly enjoyable experience with. So yes, it's wonderful to be spontaneous, But actually in Scotland particularly, but also elsewhere, the water is quite cold. So you might want to plan and have the right kit with you, and make sure that the location you're going to swim in is going to be a safe location. Yeah, planning, having the right kit with you, making sure that you've not only got appropriate kit to get into the water, if it is a stony entry, having something for your feet, having a nice woolly hat for afterwards, having lots of layers for afterwards. Even in the summer, making sure that you've got those extra layers for afterwards. So as you get into the water, your body will automatically take a really big breath in, and making sure that that breath out is longer than the inhale. Push those shoulders down, make the gap between your ears and your shoulders as big as possible. After the first 1 to 3 minutes, your breathing will start to settle. That's when you get the amazing sensation of, okay, I see why people do this now. It isn't just a horrible torture event. It is actually something enjoyable. When you do get out, your body temperature continues to cool down. There's something called the after drop, and that is when your core temperature continues to drop after you get out of the water. We get out of the water, we get something windproof around us as quickly as possible. Get to a sheltered place, get the wet stuff off as quickly as possible. Having a hot drink or maybe something to eat. The most important thing is just to get moving.
Some wonderful top tips there from Alice, and during this conversation I did promise that I would try ice dip with Alice this winter, so let's just see if that happens, and if it does, wish me luck. My next guest on Adventure Unfiltered was Molly Hughes, and we split this conversation into 2 parts. Part 1 was the truth about summiting Everest. So this episode felt like an invitation to look more closely at a story we think we already know, because Everest is one of those places that comes pre-packaged in our minds. Summit photos, flags, celebration, the highest point on earth. But what Molly brought to this conversation was the reality behind that image, the preparation, the psychology, and the truth of what it actually takes to get there and back. We talked first about preparation, because Everest doesn't begin on the mountain. It begins years before, with training that becomes a way of life, long days building physical strength, endurance and resilience, but just as importantly, mental preparation. Learning how to keep going when you're uncomfortable, uncertain and exhausted. Molly spoke about the fundraising, the commitment and the sheer belief it takes to even put yourself on that path, about backing yourself before anyone else does, about deciding that this goal is worth the time, the sacrifice and the uncertainty. And that belief didn't come out of nowhere. We talked about what first inspired her to want to climb Everest, not as a childhood fantasy, but as a growing curiosity, a sense that she wanted to understand what it demanded of people, not just physically, but psychologically. That curiosity became central to her journey. While studying psychology, Molly interviewed Everest climbers for her dissertation, listening to their experiences, their fears, their motivations and their breaking points. And instead of being put off, she felt inspired. She realised that Everest isn't climbed by strength alone, it's climbed by mindset, preparation, by breaking something enormous into manageable pieces. The psychological understanding stayed with her on the mountain. One of the most powerful parts of our conversation was how openly Molly spoke about fear. She didn't frame fear as weakness or something to be conquered. She talked about fear as information, as a signal from the body to the mind, something to listen to, not ignore. Fear for her became a tool, a way of staying alert, of making better decisions, and of knowing when to slow down, reassess, or turn attention inwards. We talked about learning to process fear rather than to fight it, about breathing through it, staying present and focusing on what's immediately in front of you, not the scale of the mountain as a whole. That approach matters, especially on Everest, because statistically, standing on the summit isn't the most dangerous part. We talked about how you're actually more likely to die on the way down. At that point, climbers have spent prolonged time in the death zone, above 8,000 metres, where the body is deteriorating regardless of what you do. Fatigue sets in, decision-making slows, exposure increases, and mistakes become more likely. So standing on the top of the world is an extraordinary moment, but it's also a moment that requires restraint, awareness and discipline. Molly spoke honestly about that balance, holding the achievement lightly, knowing the job isn't finished yet. And it's worth saying, Molly became the youngest British woman at the time to summit Everest from both the south and the north sides, an absolutely extraordinary achievement. But what struck me most in our conversation wasn't the record, it was the thoughtfulness. The way she spoke about preparation, psychology, fear, and responsibility, not as abstract ideas, but as things she actively lived and practiced. This episode is a reminder that Everest isn't a single moment. It's a long process of preparation, self-awareness, and decision-making. And maybe that's where the real power lies. Not in the summit photo, but what the mountain asks of you along the way. So here are my favourite clips from my conversation with Molly Hughes and the episode The Truth About Summiting Everest. When did the idea of Everest come around then? Was it just because you had given yourself the confidence by doing these really, really high mountains and you thought, well, why not just try for the highest peak in the world?
I mean, I think the confidence is a huge part of it. And if I hadn't had that first opportunity with the Dorset Expeditionary Society or carried on travelling, carried on doing more, I wouldn't have had anywhere near the confidence to even let the idea of Everest come into my mind. But it really kind of came in my last year at uni. So I was studying sports psychology at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And at the end of uni, I had to write my dissertation. So my big essay project, 10,000 odd words. And I knew I had to write about something really interesting for me to actually commit and write this project. And I could do anything under the bracket of sports psychology. And I played netball and I played football, but I just didn't think they were quite enough to grip me and make me kind of sit down and write about them. So I thought, what's my other passion? And mountaineering obviously sprang into my head. I loved it. I loved everything about it. And I thought, what's kind of one of the biggest challenges in mountaineering psychologically? And Everest comes to mind because it's the highest mountain in the world, the most famous mountain in the world. People that climb it must have really interesting psychological journeys. It's not the same as people just going off and climbing other mountains because it's got so much prestige and history around it and pressure. So I decided to do my dissertation all about the psychology of Everest climbers. I found 7 guys, only guys at the time, all around the UK, and I travelled and I met with them and I sat down and interviewed them a little bit like this in various places from London to the Lake District and just got hooked.
Was there any point where you felt real fear, like you had maybe never felt it before?
Yeah, lots of times. I think like from doing the dissertation, I kind of felt like I knew how hard it was going to be and I knew all the challenges and I'd researched every inch of this mountain, like really obsessively researched it. But when I got there, I kind of realised that you can spend all that time like in your university bedroom at your desk studying it, but then when you get there and you're physically experiencing it, the pain and the suffering is a million times worse and a million times harder. And fear played a huge role in it. It sounds morbid, but statistically, if you're going to die on Everest, you're going to do it on the way down, not the way up. Because on the way down, you're exhausted. You've been in the death zone for so long. So easy to make mistakes, to trip on your crampons, to not clip into a rope properly, to do any of these things. To get to the top, I felt no sense of happiness or achievement. I just felt like relief, a lot of relief that we made it. And relief that it was all downhill. So I didn't have I was exhausted, I didn't have to climb uphill anymore was a big relief. A relief that I didn't have to deal with the disappointment of not summiting. But I knew that was the time to focus. We had to get down this mountain and we had to get down steadily and as safely as we could.
What do you take to eat? Was it very regimented and very specific what you had to eat, or did you think to yourself, I'm going to pop some squashies in and eat them while I'm going?
Yeah, it was very relaxed. So at base camp, on both sides of the mountain actually, we had a great Nepalese team looking after us. So a great Sherpa team and Nepalese people. And there was a cook and people that would make great food for us. Like all sorts of things, from curries. Sometimes I do chips and that was the best thing.
Oh, nice.
So we were very well looked after at base camp. But then on the mountain itself, you're cooking for yourself. So you're melting snow and ice that you just collect from near your tent. And using that boiling water to pour it in like a rehydrated sachet of food. And they varied. Different brands, different dinners. Some were better than others.
In part 2 of my conversation with Molly, we moved away from Everest and into a very different kind of extreme, one that didn't come with crowds, ropes or fixed lines. This was Antarctica, nearly 700 miles skiing solo, pulling everything she needed behind her, moving day after day towards the South Pole. And what Molly described wasn't just physical journey, it was an encounter with silence in its purest form. She talked about how out there everything is stripped away. No sound, no wildlife, no trees, no water, no smell, no signs of life at all. Just white and sky and the slow rhythm of skis moving forward. And just Molly alone with her own thoughts. What struck me most was how honest she was about how hard that became. Without distraction, without noise, and without anyone to talk to, her mind began to turn in itself. She described a black cloud forming, heavy, persistent, impossible to ignore. This wasn't fear in the way that we might often imagine it. It wasn't panic or danger. It was something quieter and far more insidious. The kind of mental weight that builds when there's nowhere to escape your own thoughts. And for a while she really struggled. There was no one there to pull her out of it, no external change to rely on, no scenery to distract her, just the next step and the one after that. And then she told me about the moment things shifted. Standing alone in the vastness of Antarctica, Molly shouted out loud 3 affirmations, simple words, almost ridiculous, she said, in that setting, and it made her laugh. And that laugh mattered more than it sounds. Because it broke the spell. It reminded her that she was still human, still capable of lightness, and still able to interrupt the spiral. From that moment on, the journey became smaller. Not Antarctica, not the South Pole, just today. Just this step, then the next one, and then another. Day after day, she put one ski in front of the other. There was something incredibly powerful in how she described that. Not as a breakthrough or a victory, but as a choice. Repeated endlessly, to keep moving, to keep showing up, to stay with it. This episode is such a contrast to Everest, where Everest is busy, loud, complex and full of external pressure, whereas Antarctica is empty, silent, relentless in its simplicity, and that silence asks something different of you. It asks you to face yourself without distraction, to sit with discomfort, to find ways to keep going when motivation disappears. What stayed with me most was Molly's honesty about how lonely that was and how transformative it became. Not because it was beautiful all the time, but because it was real. This wasn't adventure as achievement. It was adventure as endurance, as patience and quiet resilience. And maybe that's why this conversation matters so much. Because it reminds us that some of the hardest journeys don't look dramatic from the outside. They're internal, repetitive, unseen. And sometimes the thing that gets us through isn't strength or bravery, but a laugh in the middle of the silence, reminding us we're still here, still moving, one step in front of the other. So here's my favourite clips from Molly Hughes, The Deafening Silence of Antarctica.
So the expedition started just with more suffering than I'd ever experienced. And every day I had to get up and ski because I had over 700 miles in front of me and a limited amount of supplies in my bag. It wasn't an option just to sit tight for too long. So every day I had to get up, put my tent down, and ski as much as I could. And after the first kind of week or so, I was massively behind schedule, like unbelievably behind schedule. But the storm lifted and I could finally see Antarctica in front of me. Yeah, I went to a pretty negative place. So it was kind of after the storm and after I was so behind schedule, and the weather kind of improved a bit around me. And my body was doing okay. It had been battered in the first couple of weeks in the storm, but it was okay. But the thing that wasn't working was my head. And it kind of felt like a massive black cloud had come and just sunk over my head, and I couldn't see a way out of it. It was like the whiteout again, but kind of just inside my head. And it was hard and it was weird. I guess been super lucky that I've never really experienced that kind of thing before. Because with the kind of black cloud came a huge amount of negativity. And my kind of mind almost turned on itself. So it was just, my internal dialogue turned from usually being positive to things like, why are you here? Why are you down here? Thoughts of your like absolutely not strong enough to make it to the South Pole, thoughts that you're not strong enough to make it another couple of days, thoughts of like, is it my ego that's driven me down here? Is my ego that big that I think I can survive alone in Antarctica? To just like a hugely, hugely dark place. And it happened for days on end. But one of the days that I'll always remember, probably one of the best days of my life, was kind of what you spoke about at the beginning. And that was like silence and isolation. Mm-hmm. And as much as that can be a negative thing for us, it's also something that we need. There's nothing you listen to apart from the kind of rattling of the wind or the scraping of your skis. And that huge sensory deprivation, it plays tricks on you. It is a hard thing to work through. Mm. On so many other trips, I've found it reasonably easy to be positive, to look on the bright side of things. But with all the other trips, there was always other people with me. There was firstly guides, so people that were much more experienced than me. There was amazing teammates, amazing friends that I was with. And when there's people around you, it's so much easier to share the kind of emotional load. There's people to make you smile, make you laugh, even just like pitching a tent, the physicalness of it. When you've got somebody else working with you, the jobs are halved. And I remembered a TED Talk that I watched a few years ago. And the TED Talk was all about the use of positive affirmations. So literally saying positive phrases out loud to try and change your mindset. And they're not phrases of how you feel, because at that point I felt completely rubbish, but they were phrases of how I wanted to feel and how I needed to feel to get to the South Pole. One night I came up with 3 phrases written down in my book and didn't really think they were going to work. But then the next day I shouted them to Antarctica as loud as I could. And it was incredible how well it worked and how.
What were the 3 phrases?
So the first one was really simple, and it was to say, I am strong. At that point, I never felt weaker, physically or mentally, so I knew I had to be strong. The second one was to say, I'm inspiring people. And that felt really important because it was too hard just to be about me and my own achievements. I knew it had to have some kind of impact on people back home. And the third one was to say, I am a badass, as loud as I possibly could. And that one was important because I felt like I needed to be a badass to get to the South Pole. And at that point in that low state, I definitely wasn't.
As I come towards the end of this reflective episode and the end of season 1, I feel a huge sense of gratitude. Producing and sharing Adventure Unfiltered podcast has been an absolute joy. These conversations have really stretched me, they've grounded me and reminded me why I wanted to create this space in the first place. I've been genuinely delighted by how warmly this podcast has landed, by the messages, the conversations, and by seeing the name Adventure Unfiltered start to travel through the adventure community. This means more than I can say. But this isn't the end. I have a clear vision for this podcast, and season 1 is just the beginning. If you're enjoying listening, the very best way you can support Adventure Unfiltered is by helping it grow. That might be subscribing by sharing an episode with a friend, or by posting about it on your own social media feeds, passing it on to another adventurer who might find something familiar or encouraging in these stories. And if you're wondering what's coming next, well, season 2 is already taking shape. Season 2 launches on Thursday the 5th of February. We'll be talking about sustainable adventuring, how we move through wild places with care and intention. We'll be paddling in some of the most incredible, spectacular locations in the world. We'll be exploring what it really takes to run a thriving adventure business, and we'll be travelling back to 1960 to a ski across Greenland in conversation with an extraordinary 95-year-old adventurer who was the driving force behind skiing in Scotland. There's so much more to come. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting this journey. So until next time, keep adventuring, and don't forget, in the wild, we remember who we are.